Today I'm going to convert Kamoteph the Crooked into
Trazyn The Infinite.
And not a single piece of Finecast in sight. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, I have these three miniatures just here. I've already built one of each, exactly how they're supposed to be built from the box, and I wanted to convert the other three that I had. At first, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to convert them into. Then I thought, well, what characters don't I have yet? And why I don't have them is because basically they're made of Finecast, and I refuse to buy Finecast these days. There's actually three characters which I don't have in my collection: Trazyn The Infinite, Nemesis Andrek, and Vargard Oberon. So I thought I would convert these three miniatures into those, and today we're converting Trazyn The Infinite from Kamoteph the Crooked. So the first thing I did was go into my bits box and find some bits which I thought might be useful for these conversions. I had some heads, I found a couple of legs with cloaks on, some arms, and also some bases which I thought I might use for these conversions. They have little scarabs on, they're 3D printed. So I opened the box and started to have a look at the sprue and the bits that you get in there. I've chose this one for Trazyn because of course he's sort of bending over, hence the name The Crooked, so I thought it would be a good starting place. In the end I decided not to use the 3D printed bases. I thought I would actually give those away in my little giveaway box that I'm doing when I hit 25,000 subscribers, so keep an eye out for that. So I started by just clipping all of the pieces off. I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to convert this at this moment in time, so I clipped everything off, and then I removed all of the mould lines. Now I wasn't necessarily going to use all of the pieces, but I thought it would be better just to remove all the mould lines, and then if I do pick up a piece, then I know it's clean. And then the rest of course will go in my bits box, and if I need to use them in the future, they're already cleaned up. So that's what I did first. Right, so I went to the Games Workshop website and I printed out a picture with the three characters on so that I could visualise what I'm trying to convert here. I'm trying to make these models look as close as I can to the originals. Now of course Trazyn is bent over, so this is a good start with the miniature. However, when you look at the miniature, he's very different, especially his chest plate, that headpiece, and of course his arms. Now I had to think about what I could use for his arms, and the one which is just not holding anything, is sort of just dangling down, I thought would be pretty good to use a pilot hand, maybe from a tomb blade. I've got some tomb blade bits that I could use. And then for his staff, I thought if I use Kamoteth's staff, because it's on the correct side of the miniature, and also his arms bent very much like the staff that I thought I would use, so that was going to be my starting point. I made some notes for the other characters as well, and I sorted some of the bits out, just swapping them around from these three original kits. So I got the instruction book out for Kamoteph and decided that the legs were similar enough that I would use his original legs. But what really concerns me was the torso of Kamoteph, and I decided to change that. I found in my bits box this destroyer torso, which, well, for me looks almost identical to the original miniature, so I decided this would be the torso that I would use. Trazyn does have a hood over his head. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that at this stage, but I thought the torso would work well. The torso didn't have a spine attached to it, it's just obviously hollow, ready to glue onto a destroyer spine. So I had to look in my bits box and I found a spine in there, and I thought this would be pretty cool if I chop it down. It's a slightly angled spine, so hopefully that will give me that crooked feel when I glue the torso to the legs. I figured I'd have to pin this spine on, so that's what I worked on next. So after cutting the spine to the right size, I pinned it to the legs, just drilled a hole in the top and bottom, put a little paper clip in there, and then I drilled a hole in the top of the spine and put a pin in the top so that I could pin it to the torso. And I managed to pin it so that it's angled slightly, so that it's leaning over like the original miniature. I then had a look and found a tomb blade arm, which almost looked perfect for this conversion. and had a look at some heads. I found what I believe is a Deathmark's head. He had a slightly open mouth, which is how Trazyn looks in the picture. I found this Overlord's torso in my bits box with this cloak, and I thought that would work well for Trazyn's cloak. And then I got Kamoteth's staff, which, as I said, is almost perfect. I was thinking about changing his staff slightly so that it looks different from the original miniature, but I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with that. Also thought about the head section and how I was going to do that, because, as I said, Trazyn has this sort of hood. So I had a look in my bits box and I found these bodies. I think they're from Lichguard or Praetorians, and they have this little hood at the top. So I thought if I cut that hood out of that body and then place it into Trazyn, it would work pretty well. So I glued the legs to the torso with the spine, put the head in, and then I had another look at this staff, and, well, to be fair, the staff was just too long. If I stood him up, the staff was in the way at the bottom. So I thought what I would do is cut off the little orb at the bottom, because, well, Trazyn's staff doesn't have an orb there, and then just sort of move that bottom section up to make the staff a little shorter. So that was the staff shortened, and it was all looking good. So I continued working on his hood. I cut out that little section of the body and I reshaped it slightly and then put it into place. It looked pretty good. Then I had a closer look at his cloak. I thought maybe I could use the original Kamoteph back, because there's some cloak pieces in that, but I just felt they weren't long enough. So in the end, I did decide to continue with the Overlord's cloak. So I cut the cloak off the Overlord and had a look at how I was going to put it onto Trazyn. It fitted pretty well. However, I had a little issue with the back spine because the cloak didn't really look part of the model. I found this piece here in my bits box, which seemed to work quite well. I was thinking if I could put this on the back and go over the cloak, it would make the cloak look part of the miniature. However, when I put the spine in, there was a big hole that you could see behind. So I solved that by gluing a small spine section underneath the big spine section that filled in the hole and also made it look part of the model a lot more. I then found this little spine section and I cut off the end and I glued it to the bottom so that it went over the cloak. And then, to make the spine piece match into the headdress, I actually cut out another headdress from one of the Praetorian bodies. I trimmed it down and shaped it so that I could glue it at the top of the spine and it went over the hood. It gave a bit more detail and also made the spine match into the hood. So I was nearly finished. However, I had another look at the picture and, well, the staff just didn't feel right to me. There is actually an orb in the top of the staff, and I thought, hey, I've cut the orb from the bottom of this staff out. Maybe I could put it into the top. So I actually cut out the middle section of the staff, and then I glued in the orb, which I'd cut off at the bottom. I had to open up the hole a little bit more in the middle just so that it fit in, but it worked really well. I then posted a picture of this conversion on my community tab for my Cryptics and Overlord members, and one member, Jar, thank you Jar, suggested I put an extra piece on his head dress, and I must admit, looking at the picture, it made total sense. So I had to look in my bits box, see what I could use, and I found this Praetorian body with the little piece sticking out, and I thought if I cut that off and trim it down so that it's the right shape, I could put that on top of the headdress. And there he is, all finished. I'm not sure how much of a conversion from Kamoteph the Crooked model this is, because there's not actually that much of the original model here, so I suppose this is more of a kit bash. But either way, I'm really happy how he came out, and not a single piece of Finecast in sight. I really enjoyed this project and I can't wait for the next two. In the meantime, here is a playlist of all of my other Necron conversions that I've done that you may enjoy watching next.